Coming up on episode 48 of Fresh Freedom, President Trump's one big, beautiful bill passed the House, but it's meeting some resistance in the Senate. Mark Goldwine joins us to break down if there's enough spending cuts to offset the cost of the tax cuts. Welcome to the Fresh Freedom Podcast, featuring freedom-focused representatives who are fighting for conservative values and defending your constitutional rights. I'm Nate Lucas, joined as always by Representative Eric Burleson from Missouri's 7th District, and our special guest is Mark Goldwine. Mr. Goldwine is the Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, where he guides and conducts research on a wide array of topics related to fiscal policy and the federal budget. Gentlemen, good to be with you. Welcome to Fresh Freedom.
Thanks for having me.
I have utilized the resources that you all put together at Committee for a Responsible Budget so much. We did a video leading into this reconciliation bill, and we took so many of the great resources that you guys provide. I think they are tremendous assets for anyone that's just trying to learn about this process, which is pretty difficult.
Thanks very much. I have a great team, and you can check out crfb.org. Anyone can sign up and get our resources. We try to track things really closely, and we're not left, we're not right. We just believe in fiscal responsibility and in getting the facts and the data out there, and people can make their own choices.
So the one big, beautiful bill, 2 weeks ago, it passed out of the House. Congressman, maybe you can just kind of give us your take and what led you to voting yes on this bill ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, if it were my decision, I would have absolutely leaned in and cut more spending and try to get closer. If not, I mean, look, if I could wave a wand, I would balance the budget tomorrow. I have no qualms about making significant cuts, but not everybody's there. We fought tooth and nail, and I say we, the Freedom Caucus and an extended group, the Fiscal Hawks, joined together and just really for the last 9 months have been grinding at leadership and against the moderates in our conference to get this to a place where it wasn't going to be what Republicans always do, which is just, cut taxes, but don't cut any spending at all. We were able to, originally the proposal was $30 billion a year in spending reduction. That was our speaker's proposal. We forced them to go higher to between 1.5 and up trillion, 1.5 trillion in spending reduction over a 10-year period. So that was a significant move. And then then it went over to the Senate, and the Senate dropped it back down to $4 billion. Which was even worse and more pathetic than what the speaker had proposed. And we forced them to make an agreement, come out publicly that they were going to, at minimum, agree to the framework that we had, reached, which was a minimum of 1.5 trillion in savings. So I can't express to people how incredibly challenging and difficult it was just to get to 1.5. And to force our colleagues to basically swallow that in spending cuts. There's a reason why this town is such a swamp. I mean, the absolute posture towards continuing spending it's like, this is weird, David versus Goliath. And so I would have loved to have gotten more, but the best way I can describe it is that we got a lot of wins in this. We have the border. We finally are funding the border wall. We are finally we're going to modernize our military through this. That's fine, right? But what to me the big wins is we're repealing the Green New Deal for the most part. A lot of it's being repealed, and in the last few days we were able to push up the expiration of those. Those were kind of last minute things we were holding out until the very end. And then we were also able to get a lot of the savings in the Medicaid fraud and abuse, right? So we were able to tweak that in order to make sure that program is available for the people that truly need it. Those are the kind of the wins, I think, the big wins in the bill, along with the fact that we defunded Planned Parenthood, which I never thought we could do at the federal level. And then for me, getting a Second Amendment win by repealing the federal tax stamp on suppressors and that entire registration process, I'll tell you, folks back home love that. They are excited about that. And so there's some small wins in this. And the best way I describe this bill is that look, I would love to fix our debt and deficit. But this bill, it's not going to do that. It doesn't go far enough. It really is a drop in the bucket to addressing that. And I recognize that. And I'm upset that we're not able to get there. But best way I can describe it is we're 37 runs down. We're in the bottom of the 9th inning, and we just bunted to get on first base. And look, I would love to hit a home run, or I'd love to get a double or a triple, but I mean, I'll take a bunt. I mean, if your push comes to shove, that's the situation that we were in, and if that gives you an idea of how hard this was.
From your point of view, as you pointed out in the beginning, as an organization, you guys are strictly looking at it from a policy standpoint. You're looking at the raw numbers. I think it's a little confusing for a lot of people when they look at various estimates, whether it's a CBO score, Committee for a Responsible Budget, maybe other think tanks. How are all of these, how do you drum them all up? How do you guys get to where you're at on this bill right now?
Sure. So here's the basic confines of the bill. There is almost actually $3 trillion of offsets, and that's really important, including spending offsets and also including revenue. Congressman, you mentioned reforms to Medicaid, which I think are really important, especially some of these games that states are playing. They're colluding essentially with providers to rip the federal government off, including repealing some of the Biden executive actions. You mentioned some other areas. You didn't mention higher education, but that's another one where there's significant savings from reforming the student loan program.
Yeah, which I thought, I don't mention it because I feel like the courts were going to throw that out anyway. But yeah.
Well, I give credit because this goes beyond this doesn't just take away the Biden higher education. It actually creates a whole new scheme that I think is going to be smarter. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's about $3 trillion of offsets. The problem from my perspective is there's about $6 trillion of things that cost money between the tax cuts, the extension, the TCJA, the defense spending, the border security, et cetera. And so you add that all up, including interest, by the way, on both sides. If you add all that up, it means that despite $3 trillion of offsets, we're still adding $3 trillion to the debt. And that's what concerns me because the debt today is the largest it's ever been in our history outside of World War II. We're borrowing $2 trillion a day. Our debt is 100% of GDP. If we continue on our current course, interest is going to grow to about a quarter of all revenue. It's already the largest government program. We spend more on interest than we spend on Medicare or defense. I mean, that's pretty amazing. We spend more servicing our our debt than defending our country. We spend more servicing our debt than investing in kids. I mean, it's amazing. And so from my perspective, I give an incredible amount of kudos for all the offsets in here. A lot of them are really good policy and are going to be helpful, but they ought to be going to deficit reduction, not to a plan that overall is adding to the debt.
And I feel like I've asked you this a bunch over the last several weeks, but is there an appetite for that amount of cuts that are necessary to get to where Mark is discussing?
I wish there were. I really do. What's ironic to me is that for the last 2 years or 2.5 years, I watched as we had opportunities to fight on discretionary spending cuts, and that so many members would go to the microphone and say, we could cut every dime of discretionary spending and we're still not going to balance the budget. And they're right. And they would all say, we're not going to fix things until we address mandatory spending. Well, here's our opportunity. And for all these moderates who were opposed to discretionary spending cuts, and that's where my attitude was all along my thought was, you mean to tell me it's politically hard already for you to do discretionary spending? Which is the DOGE stuff. You can't do that, but you're going to go into the mandatory spending, which is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and these Green New Deal tax credits, mostly the student loan stuff. And that's somehow politically easier? No. And so I think that the mandatory spending politically is extremely difficult to get any kind of wins on. But I do think, and we fought tooth and nail. I think that we, at the end of the day, I'm going to take that, and we're going to try to take that win, that small bunt, and try to do what we can with it in the next steps. And that is when we bring up discretionary spending, which is the appropriations process, we have some rescission packages that have been submitted by the White House. Hopefully, we take those up and vote them out. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where this Congress, if they support DOGE or not. And then I think that they've got a way of doing some rescissions. I don't know if you've heard about this, where they do it in a 45-day window of the end of the budget cycle. Then then Congress doesn't have time to act, and they actually go into place. And so there's some opportunities here, I think, to really curb discretionary spending. It's not going to balance the budget, but I think that, look, the fight didn't end at reconciliation. We're going to continue.
When you see some of the numbers that get thrown out there, and here the White House talking points, 50 wins on the one big beautiful bill, largest tax cut in American history, makes the tax cuts permanent, raises Americans' take-home pay by as much as $13,000. It reverses the spending curse plaguing Washington, D.C. When you see all these things, I'm just curious what goes through your mind when you've crunched the numbers and you come to maybe a different outcome than what a lot of people are saying that the bill does. I mean, the White House right now, everybody's... It
sounds like you're not accounting for economic growth, and I don't blame you, because we're at those tax rates today. So how can they justify the economy growing much more?
Let me talk about the wins, and then we talk about the growth, because I think there's separate points. The thing about a gigantic bill that has hundreds of provisions in it is some of them are always going to be great, and some of them are going to always be awful, right? And that's what you vote for. You vote for the great, you vote for the awful. Right. And so some of those 50 wins, I'm sure those are really great things in a bill. But when I'm adding the bill up on a whole, and what I see is a bill that adds significantly to the debt. Again, $3 trillion is about what it's going to add to the debt before economic growth. I'll talk about that in a second. But it could be much more, because there's a lot of these tax cuts. It makes permanent all the existing tax cuts, but it actually creates a bunch of new tax cuts that it puts into place for only 4 years. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, expensing for factories, an increased senior standard deduction, an expanded child tax credit. These things only last for 4 years, as if the economy is only going to need these things for 4 years and then not after that. The reason they do that is to sort of hide additional costs, that put pressure on, we'll have this exact same discussion in 4 years, and we'll say, we have to extend these or taxes are going to go up on Americans, right? And then we're going to add another $2 trillion of those plus defense, et cetera. And so if you add that, my $3 trillion becomes $5 trillion. Now, I think a fair point is they call them static estimates. They're not static, but these are conventional estimates. They account for behavior of people and businesses and state governments, but they don't account for what this could do to the macroeconomy. And a plan like this could have some economic growth effects. Those growth effects, though, are muted by the debt, right? So lower tax rates, relative to what happened otherwise. So it's an extension, but relative to what happened otherwise, lower tax rates encourage work, they encourage investment, they encourage savings. That can grow the economy. But higher debt raises interest rates, it crowds out investment, and it shrinks the economy. And so when folks have looked at this, the Joint Committee on Taxation, for example, thinks this is going to grow the economy, the tax side, by 0.2%, and get us that extra $100 billion. Penn Wharton budget model actually thinks
annually $100 billion.
No, over 10 years.
Okay.
Now, they haven't looked at the spending deficit reduction, so it'll be more with the spending. But just on the tax side, they think $100 billion. The high-end estimate is from the Tax Foundation. They think $900 billion, and they don't account for those negative debt effects. So that's sort of our range. We're talking about 100 to 900 billion of dynamic effects. It's not zero. It could be zero, actually, if the debt outweighs it. But those numbers aren't zero, but they're not enough that it's going to pay for itself.
There are a couple of tweets that have really drawn quite the reaction. One was actually an interview that Elon Musk did over the weekend, where he pointed out, you can have a big bill or you can have a beautiful bill, but I don't know if you can have both. And I think that's probably pretty true. I mean, I don't know. You've been here now for 2 years. Have you seen any big bill that's been that beautiful?
No. And I'm in agreement. Like, when you have a bill this large, here, put yourself in my shoes, though. You're defunding Planned Parenthood for once. That's a difficult choice, even if we are at a place where it's neutral on fixing our financial situation. It's a big win. It's hard to vote against that. The Second Amendment issues, very hard to vote against that. The border wall, all of the Trump immigration policies, all of the energy regulatory. It's really, really hard politically, which is why I think that they knew that, and that's why they put it all together in one bill so that they knew that it would be very difficult ultimately for a lot of members to swallow, voting against a lot of these big wins. That's why they put it into one big bill. Now, I do not disagree with Elon. The only thing I am frustrated with is, where was Elon when we were in the middle of the throes of trying to get this passed? I would have loved to have had the wind at my back when we were trying to go to battle with the speaker and with the moderates in our conference. It would have been awesome to have had these tweets and these quotes when we were in the middle of that, because the truth is that other than you, all of the other conservative groups, they all jumped on board to say, vote for this. So Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, you name it. A lot of these conservative think tanks and groups said, this is a win, vote for it. They all backed it. And so it would have been nice to have had a vocal individual like Elon giving us giving us more wind, some air cover. Yes.
This week, the tweet was, and this is after, the big departure from the administration, but he says, "I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it." And I guess, to your point, if you go back to December of last year, you had made a comment actually pretty early on in the day before the CR vote, and it caught quite a bit of online storm. And Elon got a whole. He figured out
my quote and tweeted it.
He said the CR bill is a disaster, and he held that vote from happening.
Yeah, the thing that, and I'm reflecting on this, is that, look, he's focused on Doge, and rightfully so. And so are you. You're focused on the fiscal matters, which we tried to separate all the policy. When I say we, Freedom Caucus, with some conservative senators, we really tried to separate these issues into two reconciliation bills so that we could separate the policies and the votes on things like the border and all of that away from the financial discussion. And then we would have just a knockout, drag out, even playing field fight on the financials. But we weren't able to get that done. And so here's where we are. And that's why I totally agree with Elon. If all you're focused on is the financials, then it's a disappointment. But I think that the policies, there's a lot of big wins in the policies.
I mean, I'll just say it's not too late for the two-bill strategy, right? If there's not the votes to pass this, we could still do a bill that has the important spending, that has some of the low-hanging fruit, the spending cuts. And then we still have the fiscal year 2026 budget resolution. The tax cuts don't expire until the end of the year. People don't actually start paying them really until the following April. So it's not too late to go back to that two-bill approach. I do think that would probably lead to a better outcome.
So as the bill now sits with the Senate, they will do whatever they're going to do with it, but there are definitely some holdouts, and it's not necessarily your traditional holdouts on the Republican side, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski's. When you have the Ron Johnsons and the Rand Pauls, there seems to be factions in the Senate that are all against it for one reason or another. But what are you guys kind of watching right now as to what you hope the Senate does with the bill over the next handful of weeks?
So we put out a brief piece that's sort of 5 ways the Senate can improve the House bill. Of course, I expect they're going to do all 5 of them. The first is there's like 20 different temporary tax cuts in here, right? That's not a good way to do tax policy. Pick 4 of them, 3 of them, make them permanent, get rid of the rest. Pick the most important ones. That's number 1. Number 2, the SALT deal that we came up with in the House is way too generous. The SALT cap is currently $10,000. The correct SALT cap is $0. What the House did was lift up to $40,000. Now they put some constraints on that. That's good, but we ought to bring it back to 10, or maybe 10 with some marriage penalty relief and deal with the corporate SALT. But there's things we can do to scale back that SALT. Number 3, there's actually a lot more we can do in the Medicaid space. In particular, all we did for the state gaming was stop states from making it worse. We have all sorts of ways to say states can't do any future games, and that's good. But now we got to start to gradually wean them off of their existing games, or at least reduce it. Number 4, the single largest program subject to reconciliation is Medicare, not touched at all. Even though I have ideas that like Newt Gingrich and Elizabeth Warren both support, right? There is a lot of ideas in Medicare that have broad bipartisan support that were in the Trump budgets and in the Obama budgets that would pay doctors' offices and hospitals the same amount for the same services, that would make sure we're measuring risk appropriately in Medicare Advantage. There's so much we can do in the Medicare space. And then, I can't remember our 5th one, but I think it was have the spending and the revenue equalize. And if that means that some of the changes, that means we need to tweak some of the changes to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So maybe instead of an extra year of inflation, you get one less year of inflation, or we make some means testing of the child tax credit, things like that. We can make those kinds of adjustments. And so we could fix this bill to be a big, relatively beautiful bill. I'm not sure we could do a fully beautiful bill, but we could make this a big, relatively beautiful bill. It would just require those kinds of adjustments.
The salt reductions, that's something, and I like salt and pepper, but I think like most Americans, they don't, when they hear salt tax reduction, they have no idea what that even really means.
Yeah, most Americans, probably most people in my district, they use the standard deduction, so they don't really even pay much attention to the deductions they get for their, their mortgage or their charitable donations. And in this case, it's the amount of money that you're paying to the state and the local government in taxes, whether that's through your property taxes or your income taxes, et cetera. There's, if you're making probably, I would say, if you are itemizing, whether it's because you're donating so much money, or you have a high mortgage, or you've got high taxes. In my area, we don't have high taxes really compared to New York. But then, if people, generally speaking, would you say the income, category there would be somewhere between 250 and 500,000? People that are generally earning that are the ones that are going to itemize and might see a benefit in a modest raise to
I
the
think that's
salt
right, because
tax.
the House bill, I think smartly, doesn't raise the salt cap for everybody. It just does it for people less than 500,000. So I do think the big win is going to be folks that are making that 250 to 500, bunched up around that 500, by the way, because there are tons of people around the country making $250,000 a year and still taking the standard deduction. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they're people that have 12,000 or 14,000 in salt deduction. So yes, they benefit from going to 10 to 40, but they're only getting a little bit of that benefit. They benefit just as much if we went from 10 to 15.
Is it kind of nice to have the pressure off the House for even just a few weeks? Let the Senate battle it out a little. Let them take some heat.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to jump into some other fires, right? We're getting ready to go through the appropriations process, and these, the DOGE effort. That is going to be the next fight, and I think hopefully Elon will jump in and provide some cover for this. But yeah, this is when it comes to the appropriations and the discretionary spending. That's where the House has moved on to.
Gentlemen, really appreciate the conversation and the discussion. I knew it would be a good one because, like a man in the arena, you got an outside group, and I think conversation and a healthy debate is warranted. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Be sure to follow their official accounts on X at Mark Goldwine and at Rep Eric Burleson. You can catch Fresh Freedom on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Stand strong, stay informed, and keep fighting for freedom.